Hello and welcome. My name is Randa Habelry, and thanks for joining the course on autism spectrum disorder, The Facts for Parents. I've got over 15 lectures for you that go right through from the very basics of the definition to what next. Feel free at any time if you've got any questions or you want to connect with me. There is an area on the discussion page where you can ask your questions. I'll be checking in regularly and I look forward to interacting with you. I do hope you enjoy the course and I look forward to helping you on your journey. So what is actually meant by the term autism spectrum? It means that each child on the autism spectrum is different, and each child will behave and react differently to other children. There is no one-size-fits-all policy when it comes to autism. Every child will have their own unique set of characteristics and behaviours. So although there is a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, every child is affected in a different way. Now, they can be classified as mildly affected, moderately, or severely. Mildly being the least affected, severely being the most. There's a very common statement that a lot of people in the world of autism use, mainly parents. Once you've met one child with autism, you've met one child with autism. So what is actually meant by the term autism spectrum? The word spectrum, what is it? It means that each child on the autism spectrum is different. Each one will be affected in a different way and to varying degrees. They won't have the same behaviours, they won't have the same triggers. The range and severity actually varies, and the terms that are used are mild, moderate and severe. Mild being least affected and severe meaning the most affected. There's a term that many parents, or a sentence that many parents refer to in the world of autism, and that is, once you've met one child with autism, you've met one child with autism. The statistics of autism spectrum disorder. What's the incidence? How many children are affected? Well, in Australia, according to Aspect, 1 in 100 children will be diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. In the US, according to the CDC, the Centre for Disease Control, that figure is 1 in 68. So what does that mean and how is that relevant? Well, it's relevant in our planning and in our community attitudes and awareness. We need to be aware that the number is significant and health professionals and educators need to have a plan. So what are the benefits of an early autism diagnosis? The earlier an autism diagnosis is made, the earlier you can start an intervention program. Developmental paediatricians, psychologists, psychiatrists, they're all qualified to give or to assess your child if you suspect that autism is affecting him or her. Now, early interventions can greatly improve the outcome for a child with autism. So the benefits of starting an early intervention program are an acceleration of developmental rates, significant language gains, which is really important when they're starting school, and of course, improvement in social behaviour. So what are the common signs of autism? You may suspect that your child has some form of autism, or they may be experiencing some of the characteristics, or perhaps you may want to put your mind at ease. But there are certain characteristics that are experienced by our children. Certainly not all of them and not all the time, but the principal feature is impaired social interaction, and other features, other characteristics can include no babbling or pointing by the age of 1. They may not speak single words by 16 months or 2-word phrases by the age of 2 years. Also, there may be no response to their own name, loss of language or social skills which had been present. Regression can be quite common, so they may develop quite normally up until a certain age, and then they lose skills such as language or social interaction, and this can be quite worrying for some parents. So that is always a red flag there. They may make poor or no eye contact, or they may not smile or respond to social situations. Some of our children like to line up their cars, so they line up their dolls or their toys rather than playing with the item. Some children have an impaired ability to make friends with peers or to sustain a conversation. Now, some children may not make that progression from parallel play with their peers to actually interacting and playing with their peers. They also don't develop an imaginative sense of play. They don't play make-believe, something that they can't see. If it's not concrete, they find it difficult to refer to or play around the theme. They may have an inability to converse, that your turn, my turn situation they can often struggle with. Or they can just repeat what they hear rather than have a conversation. They just parrot what they hear, and this is actually called echolalia. So they just repeat without really what they're saying making much sense. Some children have selective hearing, and this is an interesting one because it can be confused with hearing loss, and some parents actually will have their children tested because they suspect that their child can't hear them because they're not responding or they're really not listening. These children can often have restricted patterns of interest that are abnormal in intensity and focus. So again, they may have an obsession with dinosaurs or boats or computers or numbers or songs that is completely obsessive, and that's all they want to talk about, that's all they want to play with, that's all they want to collect. Some children like to line up their cereal or their cheese sticks. It's just an unusual intensity in their focus of an item. They may like to spin the wheels of a toy car rather than play with the car itself. There may be a preoccupation with unusual things, such as light switches or door handles. Some children absolutely have a rigid adherence to specific routines, and that was certainly the case with our son. He did like his routine, and this can be quite challenging, for example, in a school scenario, if the teacher is away sick and there's a new teacher, or if the agenda for the day is changed. Children with autism can struggle in adapting to a change in routine. They also seem, interestingly, to have a high tolerance to pain. They may fall over, and where your average child will start crying, your child with autism may not cry, or they may cut themselves and not really complain about it too much. Now, this is also interesting because if they're sick, they may not be able to communicate that they're not feeling well, so you'll have to rely on your own instincts there. Others have a fantastic rote memory, and they can remember phone numbers, they can remember songs or jingles or entire movie scripts. They may not necessarily bring an object to show you or to share with you, or they may just choose to rock or spin, and this is known as stimming. They will perhaps look at their fingers through their peripheral vision or stare at a fan for extended periods of time, and this is very typical behaviour. And they may be very sensitive or not at all sensitive to smells and sounds and lights, textures or touch. Some children do not like to be touched or hugged. So it's important to be aware of what they like and what they don't like so that we can respect their own sensitivities. So there are some, certainly not all, of the characteristics that can be exhibited by a child with autism, and they're the signs that you should be looking out for. What is it like to actually have autism? Some people struggle to even wrap their head around the meaning because it's so diverse and so complex. So I thought I'd take you through an exercise so you could imagine just for a little while what it is like to be on the autism spectrum. So if you'd like to go on a journey with me, perhaps you could close your eyes and imagine that you're on an aeroplane. You're about to land in Italy. You don't speak a word of Italian. You disembark from the plane and you follow the crowd. Everybody's speaking in Italian. You don't speak Italian. None of the signs are in English and you don't read the local language. So what do? You keep following the crowd and hoping that you'll get where you want to get to. You follow the wrong person somewhere. You've made a wrong turn and you're lost. Perhaps you panic a little. So you try and retrace your steps. Where do you go now? You look for someone to lead you, to guide you. You try and communicate with somebody and all they say is, no inglese. They don't speak English. So you follow another crowd and eventually, just by pure chance, you do find the queue for customs control. So you stand in the queue, you're alone, everybody's chatting around you, and eventually it's your turn. You walk up to the officer and you give them your passport, and then he asks you something. You have no idea what he's just asked you, so you just look at him and shrug, and he repeats his question, and you try and explain that you don't understand. He repeats it again. Now you're getting a little bit annoyed. You don't understand. You want this process over and done with. Finally, he just waves you through. He's a little annoyed and just wants to get through the process himself. So you're waved through and you follow the crowd again and you pick up your luggage and you think, okay, the hard part's done. Now you want to get to your hotel. You go outside and you're looking for a taxi. Where's the taxi stand? You find a taxi that's free. You hop in and the taxi driver looks at you expectantly, wanting to know the address. You give him the address. He doesn't understand you because he doesn't speak English and you're pronouncing the hotel name incorrectly. He's frustrated because he just wants to get on with it and earn his fare. You're getting angry. You've had enough of this. Why won't anyone understand you? Why isn't anyone speaking your language? You've tried your best to communicate. Nobody gets it. You just have had enough and you want to go home. That's just a fraction of what our children feel every day. They want to communicate, but they're unable to have people understand them. They don't understand the social cues. They don't understand what's expected of them. So they deal with life in their own way. And as I said, that's just a glimpse. I don't have autism, but this is how I'm trying to imagine. That's how I'm trying to step in my child's shoes to see what it feels like just for a moment. Your child has been recently diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. What now? What now? What do you do? You've received the autism diagnosis, but I'm here to tell you it's not the end of the world. Continue enjoying and loving your child just as you did the day prior to receiving the diagnosis. They're the same child. And realize that there are treatments and therapies out there, and they can greatly improve the outcome for your child. The therapies don't cure the autism, but what they do is they teach them skills. They teach them how to learn in our world and how to develop in our world. Professionals often give you the worst case scenario. Don't let them take away your hope. Take the time, certainly, to absorb the diagnosis, but don't go away with the worst case diagnosis, the worst case scenario. They have to give you the facts, and often they will give you the worst of it. It's important that you do your own research. Have a plan. There is so much information and there are so many different therapies, but try and filter out the ones that seem to promise too much. Try and filter out the ones that don't impact your child. If your child is speaking, then you don't need a program with a speech therapist. If your child has social skills, then you don't need to focus on the social skills. So research, read, talk to other parents, and be aware of the therapies that offer a complete cure. Look for treatments and therapies that are based on some scientific evidence. Have a look at the results. Don't just take the promises of the next thing that comes along. Your journey with autism will take you on a different path, but this path can also bring you a lot of joy. Will it be different? Of course it will be different, but it's different for every child. And just know that a lot of joy will still come through experiencing life with your child with autism. It's also very important to identify your child's strengths and weaknesses when searching for programs. It's equally important to develop their strengths. Nothing helps a child feel good about themselves and they're mastering a skill or being good at something. So if they do have some strengths, also focus on them. Don't make the mistake of only focusing on the weaknesses. A professional assessment will absolutely help you in identifying your child's strengths and weaknesses. Try not to outsource all of the therapies. Learn some of the techniques. This is quality time you'll be spending with your own child, and perhaps they may respond better with you in the process. In our situation, my son responded to his big sister being a part of the therapeutic process. So it may be extended family who would be useful or beneficial in the process. And above all, believe in your child, believe in them, because they can and they will make progress. But their progress is relative to them. And the hardest thing for me in the early stages was not to compare him to everybody else's child of a similar age. It's important to believe in your child and to celebrate their successes individually. It's very important also to celebrate each goal, no matter how small it may seem to others. We used to celebrate the fact that we could take our son to the shopping centre and go through some of the aisles and avoid a breakdown just because the front aisle had been changed. He would want to see the same item on the same shelf. So that may seem a little bit weird to families who don't have autism as part of their dynamic, but for us that was something huge. So do celebrate everything. I used to celebrate every word he learned, every move he made that was that was in a part of our goal. So it's important for you to celebrate it, as well as it's important for the child to see that you're happy with their progress and that they need to feel that they are making progress. And for yourself, try to maintain outside friendships. Don't make the mistake of cocooning yourself only and exclusively in the world of autism. You still have friends and family out of the world of autism. Maintain those friendships. And do know that you're not alone. There are so many parents who have walked this path before you. Connect with some of them. We've travelled the path, and we can share our experiences with you. And you may feel alone sometimes, but you certainly aren't. So your child has received an autism diagnosis. What should you not do? What not to do? Firstly and foremostly, don't panic. Panicking isn't going to help anybody, most of all your child. Don't make assumptions and expectations, just like you wouldn't for any other 3-year-old or 2-year-old. You can't map out their entire future because of a diagnosis. Brains develop at different rates, so don't make too many assumptions, particularly when they're young. Try not to go into overdrive and apply too many therapies all at once. It can be confusing for you and for the child, and you may actually decide that a therapy isn't working and give up on it too soon. So take it slowly and try one at a time, or perhaps two if they have different processes. But just be aware not to overwhelm yourself and your child, because you are just as likely to burn out as the child. Also, don't assume a one-size-fits-all. All children are different. All children vary in their characteristics, in their abilities, and a one size does not fit all. Each child on the spectrum is different. This is an important one. Don't talk about your child as if they're not there. They have an autism diagnosis. They don't have hearing loss. This is often the case when you go to the doctors or you have an assessment. It's very difficult to talk about the child, and they're there. They can hear everything you say. Also, if your neighbour or your mother asks you, "Oh, so how's Roger doing?" be aware that they can hear what you're saying, and this can have consequences on their sense of self-esteem and their confidence. So be mindful that your child can hear everything you say, even though he or she may not react as if they do. And also, don't believe all the stereotypes. We've been exposed to Rain Man in the Dustin Hoffman movie. They're not all savants. They're not all geniuses. Also, Sheldon from Big Bang Theory. I love Sheldon. Isn't he just wonderful? But not all children on the autism spectrum will display such characteristics. So just remember they're all very different, and don't believe the stereotypes. Don't also focus only on your child's challenges. Do develop their strengths and let them experience a sense of accomplishment. Expose them to different scenarios where they've expressed an interest in. So if they do like trains, perhaps you can encourage them to draw trains, and thereby developing their art, but using the theme that they particularly love. Or if they do love trains and you want to introduce reading to them, read to them about trains. Use their interests and work with their strengths so that you can get the best out of them. Also be mindful not to talk about how difficult your life has become because of the autism diagnosis. This will erode their sense of self-esteem. Even though you're not criticizing the child themselves, they will feel some sense of responsibility. So be aware not to complain about the number of appointments that you have, or that it's very difficult for you to go out as a family. Although these certainly can be true, it's best not to verbalize them in front of your child. Also, be aware that you don't need to avoid discussing the subject of autism with your child if they are in a position to have this conversation, but be mindful to use age-appropriate language. It would be quite unfortunate for the child to start school and he's introduced, or somebody mentions that he has autism, but in his mind he had no idea, or he doesn't even know what the word means. So while I've suggested you don't talk about how hard autism is affecting and how it's affecting your life, be aware that there's a difference, that if the child is able, have the conversation with them and try and discuss what autism is and how it makes him different, and try to find positive language to use. So you can talk about how some people have red hair, or some people have black hair, or some people have blonde hair. Everybody's different. That's what difference is all about. Now, autism means that you think differently, that you communicate differently. So whatever characteristics they experience, try and relate it to difference. So rather than using negative words, different is neutral. Use neutral language. However, don't shield them from the fact that they do have autism if they are able to understand. And the last one, importantly, don't be a martyr. Take the time to look after yourself, because you cannot help your child if you are an absolute mess. Don't be the martyr. Do take the time to look after yourself. Do take the time to continue to pursue your own interests. Now, these are all suggestions from me, what not to do, and I'm sure there are other people with different suggestions, but it's a good start point. So remember that it's not all about what you should do, it's also about what you should avoid doing. What not to say to the parent of a child with autism. If someone you know has just been given an autism diagnosis for their child, here are some suggestions of what not to say. Now, I got these suggestions from my own experiences. I've been told at least once one variation of these statements. First one is, "Oh, I'm so sorry." That's not particularly helpful. Also, well, what did you do? What was it that you did when you fell pregnant, or when you were pregnant? Was it something you did? Was it something you ate? I didn't cause the autism, and neither did the parent of any other child with autism. Don't have any more children. Well, that's really none of anybody's business. How about maybe they'll grow out of it? Autism is a lifelong neurological disorder. They're not going to grow out of it. Maybe your child just needs more discipline. No, it's not a discipline problem. This is one that was quite hurtful, because it came from a friend who was well-meaning at the time. It was suggested that I not put my child in a regular school because I was being selfish, and that I had to consider how that would impact the other children. This one's very common. Oh, what's his special talent? Or I've read somewhere that teaching him chess will cure him. I'm going to go and buy you a chessboard. Or what about my neighbour's son's cousin's sister has autism and she cured him. How about I introduce you to her or find out what she did? Suddenly everybody's an expert in curing somebody with autism because they know someone who knows someone who knows someone who has autism. What about, gee, everybody has autism these days, don't they? Or do you know what? It could be worse. At least you'll get school funding. Gee, I wish I could get school funding. They're all these people are probably very well intentioned, but to a parent who is a little fragile and struggling to deal with the challenges of raising a child with autism, they're not helpful comments, so just avoid saying them. What can you say to the parent of a child with autism? Helpful statements to make to a parent of a child with autism can be something like, I don't know much about autism. Can you tell me a little about it? Or what can I do to support you? How about, you're doing such a great job. Or you have such a beautiful child. This is a good one. Shall I drop by for a chat? I'll bring a meal, a bottle of wine, some biscuits, anything, whatever you think mum or dad needs. But they probably just want your time. Sometimes parents just need somebody to talk to, so let them just talk. There are things that you can do even though you may not be an expert in autism. You can just be a friend. From my experience, there are various emotional stages that you're likely to go through when you're confronted with an autism diagnosis, and I've called this the double dip principle. The double dip principle outlines the stages that parents are likely to go through when first told about their child's autism. Now, the first one, diagnosis. That can often feel like a punch in the stomach because you don't expect it, or perhaps the delivery can be quite brutal. That can then take you through to a stage of grief where you're perhaps mourning the loss of what you thought was the future for your child, and you're looking at a completely different future. In that state of grief, you can isolate yourself and block out friends, family, and then you're in quite a small world and loneliness can manifest. Once you're in that lonely world, what can happen is it will get smaller, more lonely, and you can fall into a state of depression. And in that state, you can't function, you can't help your child effectively, so you do have to make the decision, am I going to stay depressed? Do I need help? Perhaps you need medical assistance, maybe you need counselling, or maybe you can do it on your own. However you do it, you need to be aware that you need to get yourself out of that state. And then time. Time is good. Time will eventually, with time, you adapt to your new situation where quite often the abnormal can become normal. It's your life, it becomes your routine, and that's when you can make the decision. I can do this, I have what it takes, and you're aware that your child is amazing and every day they overcome challenges that others wouldn't dream of. So you make the decision to get through this. You're out of the state of depression, whether by your own means or with assistance, and then you find an inner strength. And when you find that inner strength, acceptance comes. With that acceptance, you have an inner peace. When you do find that inner peace, you become empowered. And once you are empowered, you become the strongest advocate there is for your child. Now, you need to be their strongest advocate because you're it. You have to represent them. You have to represent them at all the doctors' meetings, at the school meetings, the individualised education plan meetings, the IEPs. You have to, if they don't have a voice, you have to be their voice. So you need to empower yourself to become the strongest advocate for your child. I do discuss this process in more detail in my book, but that's the general outline of the double dip principle. Social inclusion for children with autism. Impaired social interaction is a common feature for children with autism. Now, each child on the autism is different, but something which is most common is they are predisposed to social isolation as a result of their difficulties with initiating conversation and play, expressive and receptive language, interpreting figurative speech or idioms. If you told my son that it was raining cats and dogs, he'd probably run out to the window to look for the cats and dogs falling out of the sky. Or if you told him to keep your chin up, he would. He'd keep his chin up. So this all presents difficulties in social interaction when they can't interpret or express as others do. They can't interpret social cues sometimes. Now they may not be able to be aware that putting their face too close to yours is invading your own personal space. So this can cause problems. Or sometimes when you don't give somebody eye contact, you're trying to show that you don't want to talk to them. They may fail to interpret that. So the interpretation of social skills can be quite challenging for our children on the autism spectrum. Now, inclusion into mainstream educational settings is now accepted practice, which is great because our children need exposure with their normally developing peers so that they can mimic behaviour that's appropriate and learn how to interact socially. However, that's often done without the support that's required. Now, you can't just put a child with autism into a mainstream setting and expect them to flourish. They won't. They need the support. They need the structures in place. The plans need to be put in place. So while inclusion can absolutely have a positive impact, if it's forced and unsupported, it can have very, very negative impacts on the child. Often, with the best of intentions, schools may, as a part of their inclusion process, discuss the autism diagnosis with the child's cohort and announce that this child will be joining their group. But often that's where the inclusion process stops. That's not enough. It needs to be continued. But teachers and students are then left to their own devices to navigate the new dynamic of the classroom. And that's not fair because training and support is required. Often in the planning meetings in a school, the educators or the authorities will pay lip service to inclusive practices. They do like the terms inclusive practices, best practice, but the teachers aren't given the resources. If the affected student is then left to their own devices in an unsupported environment, and this may lead to an increase in disruptive behaviour, particularly if the child is not engaged, is not learning, is feeling frustrated. Can you imagine yourself in your work situation? If you're frustrated, you're disengaged, there is no interaction with you. You wouldn't feel very happy in that environment, and you wouldn't look it, and you'd be snappy and you'd be grumpy, and it goes on. That's how the children feel when they're not supported. So the support is critical, particularly in the social setting as well, because we tend to focus only on the academic setting. Now, a valuable and very underutilised support structure is from the child's peers, not just the teachers. They need their school mates to include them in their social activities. Social inclusion for the psychological well-being of a child with autism is crucial. It's not just a feel-good way of saying, it would be great for my child to have friends. It's actually an important part of their development. And there are psychological theories of motivation that talk about this in great detail. And the one that illustrates it very clearly and very simply is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, Maslow's hierarchy of needs states that we need to first achieve the bottom level or the base level of the pyramid, or the first need, the foundation, prior to progressing to the next need. And that next need needs to be satisfied prior to progressing to the next one on top of that. So, for example, the first need is our psychological need. We need to breathe air, we need to drink water, and we need to eat. So they're the first needs that we look to satisfy as human beings. Once these needs are satisfied, we move on to safety and security. What do we mean by that? We need a place, a roof over our heads, a place to call home. We need to feel safe. We need to feel that we're not going to be attacked, or that we are in a safe environment. Once that is achieved, we move on to the next step. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We need to feel a sense of love and belonging. If we do not feel that sense of love and belonging, we cannot progress to the higher levels. Now, the next level is self-esteem. However are we going to expect our child or our children with autism to develop their sense of self-esteem if they don't experience a sense of love and belonging? Now, imagine that they go to school, they're loved at home, so they've experienced it, they go to school and they feel like an alien. They're alienated from everything. They're not able to participate. They're alone. And at lunchtime, my son would come home from school almost every day and say, I was alone at lunch and at recess. Why won't my friends talk to me? That's what I'm talking about, that sense of alienation. That sense of belonging is difficult to achieve without the adequate support. My son used to come home from school almost daily and ask me, why am I alone every lunch and every recess? He was lonely at school. He didn't experience that sense of belonging. Now, if that is not achieved, if that is not experienced, it is very difficult for the child to move on to develop a sense of self-esteem. And again, if that self-esteem is not achieved, then they cannot achieve the highest order of self-actualization, which is where they actually succeed in a certain area or develop a skill, a talent, and thrive post-school. So it is not just a feel-good way of saying that our children need to socialise or they need friends. It's based on science. They do need social inclusion to develop. Congratulations on completing this course. I hope you found it helpful, and I hope that it will be of some assistance to you on your own autism journey. I put this together as a result of my own passion in making this world a more inclusive world for our children on the autism spectrum. It's a result of my lived experience, and I know that if only way back then another parent could have just said, it's okay, this is the journey, and it can be a very good journey, which it has been for us, it would have made a huge difference for me. So my passion and my purpose now is to make things better for the kids on the spectrum and also for their parents. I've extended this further and written a new curriculum called the MATES Social Inclusion Project. And if you do want to know more about that, you can connect with me via LinkedIn or Facebook or on my website www.dealingwithautism.com.au. I look forward to continuing my communication with you, and I hope that together we can make this a much better place for our children. Now, I can give you a brief overview on this curriculum, but it is a lengthy and a detailed one that comprises of a training guide for teachers and a training guide for students. But in short, it's all about, as I said, mates assisting to engage socially. So the first one is, of course, it addresses the letter M. M for mates. We all need a mate. Think about what you do when something wonderful happens in your life, or when something challenging happens. The first thing you do is you want to talk to a mate, you want to talk to a friend, you want to communicate. So having a mate is actually very important in our lives as human beings. It's equally important to our children. Otherwise, if they feel isolated, they can find themselves falling into a state of depression, and anxiety can manifest. All sorts of other issues can develop. So we do need to acknowledge and establish that, acknowledge mainly that our children need a mate. The second letter, assisting. As a society, we have no problem seeking assistance. Sports people take advice and guidance and training from coaches. That's not an issue that we struggle with. People who want to succeed in business often turn to mentors or business coaches. These days we also turn to life coaches. So the concept of assistance is not a foreign one, and we need to learn to apply it to our children, and they need assistance in socialization. The letter T represents not just the preposition, but also the number 2. It takes 2 to have a friendship, to form a mateship. These days we're so attached to our iPhone, our iPad, our iPod. It's all about I. And our children are increasingly experiencing isolation. So we may give them their iPhone or their iPad, and that just perpetuates that. And their peers are also self-absorbed and experiencing their own version of the I generation. Now we have to somehow break through that barrier and change that I or that 1 to 2. Our children need 2, someone else to form a mateship, a friendship with. These days, we've become more and more disengaged as a society. Whereas before, it took a village to raise a child. We had extended families. The grandparents were involved, the aunties, the uncles, everyone was involved in the family. We've moved from an extended family to a nuclear family where there's mum and dad and the kids. And now we have the situation where we've got more and more single parent families. So what's happening is it's no longer a village scenario. We don't have the support that we need, that we used to have. So we're seeking engagement in different ways. We need to engage with our children. We need to have a formalised structure to engage with them. And this is what the MATES program is designed to do, to engage our children. And the last letter, of course, is the letter S, the most important one, socially. If our children have challenges with social behaviour, that's what we need to focus on. We are social beings. We all crave social interaction. Just because our children may not show that they're interested in interacting socially, it doesn't mean that they don't want to interact. It doesn't mean that they don't, just because they don't talk doesn't mean they don't want to talk. So apply that same logic to the social aspect. They do want social interaction. They need social interaction because it's part of who we are as human beings. Now, that's just a very brief overview of the MATES project, which so I invite all of you to continue communicating with me or to make a connection with me. I'm contactable on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on my website, www.dealingwithautism.com.au, or you can click on my picture above. I look forward to your feedback and to staying in touch with you. Thank you.